just a couple of things for technology, and then I'm going to shut up. That's Jill and Barbara will be talking to you and showing you things and sharing screens, which is why we put you all on mute. But if you want to ask questions, can you use the chat box, which is at, I think on most PCs and Macs is at the bottom, but if it's an iPad, it may well be at the top. And if you just click on the chat, you can then write your question or even a comment if you want to mention that something's wrong. I'll be keeping an eye on that, and then at the end we'll deal with all the questions. As I said, we are recording so that we can let people that couldn't come to the meeting this evening see it, so that we can do they can come to the follow-up ones as well. I think that's all for the techie stuff, but if anybody has any problems at any time, just hold your hand up and I'll keep my eyes open. Okay.
Right. So I know I say I'm Groam House, but really that isn't my name at all. I'm Jill Harden. I work at, like Barbara, we're both volunteers at Groam House Museum, and I work on the collections side and the curatorial side of the museum. And so I thought I would like to welcome all of you to today. I know that we're all in a learning curve, but it's brilliant to be able to bring people together from such a wide variety of places, rather than just having people come to an outreach session on the Black Isle or Nairn or Golspie or wherever it is, and having to do it in different ways. So in a way, COVID is allowing us to be much, much broader in actual connectivity with everybody. So I'd like to welcome you to the knit along, Groam House Museum's knit along, but it's also George Bain collection knit along. And so I'm going to give you a very brief presentation about, well, who the heck's George Bain? Why was he a knitter? He wasn't, but he did create knitting charts. And why did he do that? Because I just want to set it in context, because this is all part of a much larger project which the museum is involved in, which we started probably over a year ago now, and will be completed sometime later this autumn. So I'm going to share my screen, but but do put things into the chat, or do raise your hand if you've got problems. I can't see you once I share my screen, so it will be Jenny who will be picking up on things if there's questions you want to ask midway through. I don't mind being interrupted midway through, that's fine. At the end, I'm going to be handing over to Barbara. But one of the things, just one bit of technical things that I do want to mention is that for many people, they've joined this, like some of you have, either through, not gone through the closed Facebook page, have joined it in other ways. You've dealt with that, those of you who are present have dealt with that by mentioning it to Jenny that you want, you need to get onto that closed Facebook page so you can get the pattern and everything else. This isn't the only session, if you like. So when you went onto the art tickets thing, it wasn't completely clear that, okay, there's a session today, but there's also a session next week and the following week and the following week, which you can choose on, or which we sort of expected we would all attend sort of and join in and ask questions and learn from each other over the coming 4 weeks. And it'll culminate in a talk by Lucy Haig, who is an eminent knitter who uses Celtic art in the development of her patterns. But that also is a separate again, and if you'd like to come along to that lecture on May the 6th, I think it is, you'll need to book separately for that as well. Now you can book for that on our Groam House Museum webpage. So all you do is go onto the Groam House, search for Groam House Museum, go onto the webpage, and booking for the Lucy Haig event is open at the moment. It's restricted to 100 people. So if you'd like to attend, I would recommend joining comparatively soon. she says. Those of you who have been knitting for quite some time may well know of Lucy Haig. I mean, she produces absolutely amazing things. We used her work in an exhibition that we had a couple of years ago as indicative of the influence of George Bain. So I hope that all helps. We will get to the knitting, I promise. But this is very much a startup session where Barbara's going to start us all off with the hat after what I'm going to be talking about, which will take 10 minutes, maybe quarter of an hour, but shouldn't be very long at all. So, whoops. So I'm going to share my screen. And start this. And hopefully you can all see that. You seeing it? Thank you, Jenny. So we called this this knit along Bain's Toorie Bunnet, and it's all about George Bain and the designs that he created, not as finished patterns, but as charts from which people could adapt the pattern onto items that they wanted to knit. It's part, as I said before, it's part of a larger project which is funded by Museums Galleries Scotland, to which we're very grateful for a large amount of money, and with support from obviously our own time. And it's related to the fact that George Bain's collection came to Groam House Museum and it's nationally recognised, and we need to share it much more widely with the world, if you like. So our project is doing this, and one of the main ways of doing it, apart from the various outreach projects that we've been doing as part of it, is to create a website which focuses on the Celtic art of George Bain and enables people not just to look at stuff, but actually to get involved in things. So we're encouraging people to comment on his work, but we're also encouraging practitioners to add their own work so that people can get an idea of the huge range of material that is being produced in the Celtic art tradition, but in modern ways and with modern interpretation and development of those designs that he was so passionate about. So this website, as you can see, is full of pretty glorious stuff. We haven't started putting on the sort of vaguely repetitive detail, but each item has a bit of information associated with it and images that you can roll over to enlarge, related images of related objects as well, and background information. We consulted with practitioners to find out what they wanted to know about George Bain's work, and very much trying to either develop information about how he drew out his designs, or what he was making and what he made things with, and what skills he was encouraging others to use. So this is all at Groam House Museum, which is here up on the Murray Firth. And why did this collection come to Groam House Museum? Well, it's all based on the fact that Rosemarkie was a very important focus for early Christian Pictish art. Oopsie, sorry, but Pictish art in sculpture. We don't have textiles surviving, we don't have wood surviving, we don't have painted materials surviving, but we do have the sculpted stones. The most famous of which is this cross slab with its really intricate interlace and curves and spirals and key patterns. And it's this reason, and it's this that brought the George Bain collection to Groam House, because for a while George Bain lived down in Drumnadrochit, which is only about 30 miles away. He actually drew the Rosemarkie cross slab aspects of it and was well aware of the other stones in the collection. And he used them to show how to draw out Celtic art. So the Bain family, when they were looking for a new home for all his material, approached the museum back in the late 1990s, and we've been looking after that, growing that material and looking after that material ever since. So who was George Bain? So he was, a lot of this information you can get off our website, in the George Bain part of the collection website. But he was born in 1881 up on the very north coast of Scotland in Scrabster. Moved south to Edinburgh in, I think, when he was about 5 or 6. Attended school until he was 14. Must have shown great skills in art, both watercolours, drawing, that side of things. He must have done a bit of technical work as well, because he became apprenticed to newspaper illustrators. And that's what he did from about 1896 onwards until he started, and then he started doing evening classes at the Edinburgh College of Art. And in the 1904, 1906, he actually got a scholarship to go down to London to study at the Royal College of Art down there for a couple of years. So he's an artist, very much an artist, but an artist based on illustration, graphic, if you like, graphic design, who worked all his time as an illustrator up until the First World War. But in doing that work, he also took part-time posts to teach this sort of to teach specific techniques of illustrations, illustrating events, nothing to do with Celtic art at all. It was purely the sort of illustrations that a newspaper or a magazine would need in a time when photography wasn't really included in newspapers. After he'd served in the First World War, he came home and took up a teaching post at Kirkcaldy, and in the early 1920s became head of art at Kirkcaldy High School. And that's where he stayed for the whole of the rest of his work time. He retired in 1946, immediately after the Second World War. For some reason, and I'm not really clear why, from when he got back from war, he started to get interested in Celtic art, Pictish art in particular, and then started to find other sources of where you find Celtic art, whether it be the Book of Kells, Irish carved stones, whatever it might be. And he started to encourage his school pupils to actually learn graphic design, technical design through Celtic art, and he was absolutely passionate about it. He was determined that schools across Scotland should start to teach Celtic art because it's a real method of actually sharing things. But what he was passionate about was that it wasn't just applied to technical drawing. So as you can see on this, The New Era in Home and School in 1935, it's the work of Rona Fraser, age 16, from the school, and she's drawing something out as an illustration for a magazine. But he also got his pupils to do embroidery. He also got related pupils to do embroidery, to do woodwork. The school's technical design section was using his Celtic art, exploration of Celtic art, to encourage students to actually learn how to take art and use it in other forms. So he was very imaginative, and he continued in that way all his life. So it wasn't just while he was teaching school pupils, it was afterwards, and once he'd retired as well. He retired and moved to Drumnadrochit on the shores of Loch Ness. That's because his wife came from a croft just above the village, and he was determined not to forget all the knowledge that he'd already drawn together for his school pupils. And he eventually found a publisher based in Glasgow who was prepared to draw together the illustrations that he'd had pinned up in the classroom for his pupils. And he produced these little booklets, elementary knotwork, key patterns, spirals. And then that was in 1946, and or 1947, they were reprinted. And eventually his publishers suggested that they were actually all brought together into a book, Celtic Art, The Methods of Construction. That was first published in 1951 and is still being published today, which is amazing. It's like, wow, people are still interested. Hurrah! So he was doing that. He was trying to encourage people across Scotland to take account of Scottish culture and to enjoy Scottish culture and use it in their own handiwork, both for home use and also as small-scale craft businesses. He also took his own commissions, so he started work to actually design large carpets for a Kidderminster company down in England, producing beautiful rugs and carpets using Celtic designs, as you can see here. He continued to illustrate books, produce book plates. I mean, he was prolific, absolutely prolific in his work. But while he was at Drumnadrochit, he actually opened up what he called the Celtic College of College of Celtic Culture, where he encouraged local people to learn new crafts. And he took their work and some of the work that his school pupils had done and he'd kept to exhibitions down in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, all over. He was promulgating the use of Celtic art in all sorts of media, embroidery, wood. The girl in the middle is hand making a rug, and then you can see the sorts of items in the photo of one of the exhibitions, the sorts of things that were being produced. And this is his school work, where we've actually got a photograph of him with adult students learning how to create art, the designs of the Celtic tradition, and the Celtic tradition dating to like sort of 600 AD through to about 900 AD. They produced their own work. I'm not clear how much of it was sold by any of the students that actually worked out of his classes in Drumnadrochit or elsewhere. But he and his family certainly produced things. So all of these items on this page are designed by George Bain. Some of them, I'm unclear as to which were actually made by George Bain. So the greetings cards, they're certainly his work. And the painting on the coffee set, that's his work. It was a gift to one of his daughters. Not sure whether it's a wedding present or a later present, but certainly that's for that. He may well have done that beautiful bowl, which is actually a painted wooden bowl, and they just used it as a flower pot. And you think, wow. But other items are made by his daughter. Claire was an avid knitter, and we believe that either he or his son actually carved the wooden item on the left-hand side. So the whole family were involved. We know that his wife not only received gifts, so the brooch top right was a gift from him to her, but she also painted china bowls using interlaced Celtic designs. So it's a huge variety of work that he was encouraging others to do. So many people today say that they got their interest in Celtic art and how to create interlaced patterns and knotwork and key pattern from George Bain's book. And really, that's what this is all about. It's about but what we're going to be doing is translating his work, his knitting charts, or his general information about how to do Celtic art into knitting. The part photograph of the jumper is actually the design that is in the chart on the left-hand side. And that design is also, although it's not so clear, it's also in this cardigan here. So he was clearly interested in knitting, and I don't know whether it's because his daughter encouraged him, saying, you know, I need another pattern, Dad. But certainly by the time he was living in Drum, he was actually people were getting in touch with him, and he was sending charts out to people. So it's something that we have got addresses over in the Western Isles, up in Caithness and down in England, of him actually sending people charts so that they could knit his pattern, his charts up into a pattern for an item that they wanted to make. So in a way, we're continuing that tradition through Barbara's expertise, and we hope that you're really going to enjoy what comes next. So I'm now going to pass on to Barbara. If you'd like to unmute Barbara, and we can carry on from there.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jill. That's very, very clear illustrations and a very interesting talk. Right, so the first thing we're going to talk about, as Jill said, is how I took one of George Bain's patterns, the one we saw right at the very beginning, this one, and how I developed that into the George Bain hat. The patterns that George Bain drew, the charts that he drew, are very clear and do make quite good knitting patterns, but only if you're knitting in a very fine gauge yarn, something like 3 or 4 ply. This is because when he charted his designs, he used a squared graph paper. Now, if you look very closely at a piece of hand knitting, and I don't think I'd be able to get this hat close enough to the screen for you to see, but you'll see that knitting stitches aren't actually square. They're more of a rectangle, being wider than they are high. I think it's wider than high, yeah. So modern knitwear designers will use a rectangular graph paper to chart their designs. It's much more suitable for anything from double knit onwards. You can knit a design on that's drawn on squared graph paper, and although there is a tiny difference, it's probably not enough for you to really notice it, especially when you're wearing it. But if you take anything that's a heavier gauge, you'll start to see gaps in the pattern, especially where 2 lines cross. So what I had to do is, first of all, to draw his chart onto a suitable graph paper. I used one with a 50-40 ratio, so that's 50 stitches, like 40 stitches to 50 rows. And then it was just a matter of experimenting and finding out by swatches, lots and lots of swatches, exactly which size needles would be best to knit it up in. I had to adjust the pattern slightly for some of the crosswork, so that I didn't get big gaps where the lines cross over, which took a lot of trial and error, I have to say, and a lot of swearing and a lot of throwing things on the floor and a lot of unwinding stitches. Eventually I managed to work out a single panel from the stitchwork that would work. I knew which yarn I wanted to use. I wanted to use Julie's yarn because it's such a gorgeous feel to it, and I've knitted things in it before. So I eventually came up with this pattern. I've been knitting hats for a long time, so I can practically knit a basic hat with my eyes closed. So it was a matter then of dropping George Bain's pattern into a suitable position on the hat, which again required a bit of experimenting, getting it to sit perfectly so that it places perfectly on the head. And I added this little, it's called a corrugated rib border, and it's basically the knit stitches are in the cream colour, the purl stitches are in the grey, just because I like it. Wasn't anything to do with Celtic art, although I suppose you could say it represents standing stones in a way. I just like this sort of this ribbing. It gives a tighter feel around the head. Some ribbing on hats will after a while get quite loose and you find them slipping down. This, because it doesn't stretch as much as a rib done in single colour, because of the floats on the back, it doesn't have as much give, as you can see. Oops, do it the other way around. Now a normal, I should have brought a normal ribbed hat in, but if I were to stretch a normal ribbed hat, my hands would be off the screen. As you can see, this stretches slightly, but not quite enough to make it very baggy. I decided to design it as a bunnet. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with bunnets, bunnet is an old Scottish word for a close-fitting hat. And bonnets have been worn since way back in time, mostly by labourers out in the fields. They were easy to knit up from wool spun at home. They were quite often knitted and then felted to keep the weather out. There is a reference to a bunnet in the poem Tam O'Shanter by Robbie Burns, where Tam rides off through a storm clutching his good blue bunnet to stop it blowing off in the wind. The Toorie on a bunnet is the pom-pom or tassel. Toorie comes from the word tor, which is a tower. And it was a joking reference, firstly given to soldiers who wore bonnets with a sort of a regimental tuft, if you like, on the top. And they would be called, see that bunnet with the tower on top, or the tor on top. And it was gradually shortened or nicknamed into Toorie. Nothing to do with the Tories of today, I hasten to add. But so that's why it's called Bain's Toorie bunnet, and not just Bain's beanie or Bain's woolly hat. I've got my keep referring to my notes here, which is a bit silly. I should have learned this all off by heart. As I say, I used for my sample Julie's wool. Julie's wool is produced mostly from happy Highland sheep, all within a very short distance from the museum here on the Black Isle. The Black Isle, for those of you who don't know it, is not actually an island. It's a peninsula, just about 20 miles north of Inverness. We jut out on a short spit of land from the west coast of the Moray Firth. As it narrows down to come into Inverness, we jut out on a little peninsula in to the Moray Firth. And because we've got water on three sides of us, we have our own little microclimate. We're a very fertile area. Some say the Black Isle is called the Black Isle from the black soil around here, or from the fact that it very rarely snow lays around here. Because it's so warm. We can grow things here that perhaps couldn't be grown further up or down the coast. And if and when, or when, I should not say if, but when you're all able to travel, we'd like you all to come and visit us here in Rosemarkie and on the Black Isle generally. It's a lovely area, lots of things to see and do. Just down the way from us, a mile to my left, over my right shoulder, there's another spit of land that juts out into the Moray Firth with a lovely old lighthouse at the end. It's called Chanonry Point, and it's one of the best land-based places to view bottlenose dolphins in the whole of the UK. We have a very narrow part of the Moray Firth there, and when the salmon are running, or the mackerel, the dolphins follow them in, and a feeding frenzy ensues. There are various tours that go out by boat, where you can actually go out and see the dolphins up close. But they do come in quite close to shore. So even if you're standing on the beach in front of the lighthouse, you're on a rising tide. At most times of the year, you'll usually see dolphins. Although I ought to warn you, it's a tiny car park and there are queues of traffic to get into it during the summer. So the best thing to do is to park in Fort Rose and just take the short walk up to the lighthouse. It's good exercise. Right, so let's get on to actual knitting. We're starting off with the two-colour rib. Now, as you've probably noticed, I have very arthritic hands. And when I tried to do a video to show you how to do this ribbing, my hands got in the way all over the place. So I asked my sister Sue, who also lives locally, who makes the most fabulous jewellery. Some of you will have seen her at craft shows. She is Sue from Earth Gems. And she's made a little video to show us the basics of doing the 2-colour cast on. And if Jenny would like that to run that for us at this point, that would be lovely. And I'll have a sip of my
I'm just hoping
here.
this works. So if people,
This is
when
similar.
I've actually shared the screen, if people can see the video, can you do a thumbs up for me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Jenny, share screen. Oh. Not there yet, Jenny.
no, it's coming. Sorry, should be coming.
It's coming. I want to mention that we are in the Scottish Highlands and download speeds here can be painfully slow at times.
Jenny, it looks as if there are 2 people in the waiting room.
Oh, right.
I've only just noticed.
I'm not quite sure how to let them in at the moment. Can you let them in, Jill? Oh, no, I've lost the video now.
No, it doesn't seem to let me. So we'll leave it for now and we can get back to them. Don't
Okay.
worry.
Can people see the video?
Let's carry
now?
on with the video.
Can people see the video?
No, I've got your outbox, Jenny. I've got your email box. Oh, there's the video. If you press play, that should go.
It should
that
go.
should run full screen now. Which is what happened.
Right, I'll start from the beginning again.
No, we've still got your desktop in the background, Jenny.
Can you see the video? Oh,
We can see it, but we can see the whole of your desktop.
sorry.
We really need to have the video enlarged to full screen.
It won't go any different, I'm afraid.
Okay, don't worry about it because it's very similar. Yeah, it's very similar to one of the ones that I put on the group. Anyway,
Okay.
and I'll tell people where to find them. You have to make the screen bigger by clicking on one of the little icons, says Heather.
It's, yeah, it's not working at all.
On the right, yeah, on the sorry. I think it's the little square with a triangle in the bottom of it.
I clicked on that and it doesn't make any difference. Oh,
Or maybe double click it, I don't know.
I've done that as well. Sorry. Thank you for the help though. I'll take any help whatsoever.
If you close your mail screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh wait,
Close
can you
that
click
one
on the
and close that
green?
one.
The little green, can you click on the little green circle on the top of the video? That, yeah. I don't know if it'll work.
I don't know why I
wonderful.
didn't know that it was as simple as that.
Oh, well done, Heather.
Thank you.
Well done,
I
thank
don't
you.
you.
Do you want me to start it again?
Yes, start it up again, please.
I am sorry about that, people.
The sound on this, by the way, isn't brilliant, so you might want to turn your volume controls up. We'll try and get more of this sorted out by the time that we come to the next one.
This hand, let me see that. Turn your hand the other way up. So you have this watch. It's in the shop. Now the thing to remember is that the yarn that you start with first is not the stitch, the colour of the stitch that will end up. We start with the back. Up, down on the front, down the front.
Is it control?
Down the front yarn,
Where's the video?
Back again. Down the back again. Look. Back to the one finger. Down the back yarn. Thumb. Look. In. Front one on the thumb. Down the front one. Look. 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 Back one. Down. Look. Up. Down. Down. Look. Down.
Let's come back to me. I'm sorry, that wasn't a particularly good video, and it seemed to be running rather jerkily rather than a smooth video that suited. But anyway, there is a link to a professional video on the Facebook group that you can go and look at. There are also hundreds of videos on YouTube. That is one way of doing a two-colour cast on, which gives you an edging which looks a bit like a braided edging. You can see, so each stitch is alternating colours or alternating in twos. If you want to do a simpler cast on, you can. Long tail cast on is very easy to do, or you can just do it traditional thumb over the needle. You can do that and just have a one colour edging, and then pick up your second colour when you start doing the ribbing. The ribbing is really the important bit. You're going to want to do the knit stitches in your main colour. No, other way around. Yeah, want the knit stitches in your main colour and the purl stitches in your contrast colour. And because you're only doing 2 stitches at a time, you don't have to worry about trapping or catching the floats behind. They'll come up quite neatly like this. You see, it's only when you get to doing about, by the way, this is a thicker wool on thicker needles that I've knitted up as a sample just so you can see it a bit better. This gives it the stretch because it's got those extra pieces of yarn at the back. It's only really when you come to start doing only about 3 rows of the pattern where you've got to skip more than 2 stitches of each colour. And they are very easy to do. And I'm going to attempt to try and show you that now. There's also a link to a YouTube video. There are certain people that I like to follow on YouTube videos because they produce very clear, very slow, very well thought through videos. It does mean you have to watch an advert for 2 minutes beforehand, but the best things always need to be paid for somehow or another. As you can see from this sample I'm knitting up, and I'm going to show you this from the back so that you can see what happens when you trap the yarn. So I'm going to come a wee bit closer. I think, is that okay? I'm not too fuzzy. On this yarn here, I'm knitting 5 stitches in the cream and then 1 in the grey. Now, if I just went ahead and knitted another 5 cream, I'd have a long strand of cream. When I come to the next grey, I'd have about that much of the cream looping at the back. And we don't want that because it's all too easy to get your finger stuck in it or an earring. or if you've got dogs like me, a dog jumping up and catching hold of it. So all you need to do is, and if you can see this from the back, I'm using the cream yarn as I would normally, just knitting a stitch, knitting another stitch. Now, I've got this third stitch here out of 5, and I want to be able to hook this grey yarn up out of the way. So I'm going to just lay it over the top. I should have worn something black so you could see the needle, but I hope you'll be able to see this. Just lay your grey yarn across the top of your needle as though you were starting a stitch, and then pick up your cream yarn. I don't know, I picked it up the wrong way around because I'm trying to do it backwards. Right, so my grey yarn is on the top of my needle. I'm then going to pick up my cream yarn, pull that through without pulling the grey through at the same time. And what it's done is to tuck a tiny bit of the grey behind the cream, so that now when I carry on with the cream, I've only got the usual 2 strands at the back. I'm not sure how well that's showing up on the screen. So instead of having a strand of grey that's 5 stitches long, I've now only got a little strand of grey that's 2 stitches long. So if you do that every 3rd stitch on a long row, your stitches will end up tucked together nicely and caught up into a nice neat finish like this. Now again, there are some very good videos, one of which I've put on the Facebook page, which explain all this in slow motion. And once you get the hang of doing it, it's very easy to do. And a lot depends on the method you use. A lot depends whether, like me, you're a continental knitter, that is, you do everything with your left hand, or you're a thrower, which is the English method, where you're actually putting the yarn round with your right hand. Everybody know the distinction between the two? Yes, nod. I can't hear you, but you can nod. So an English knitter would take the yarn. An English knitter would take their working yarn around with this hand and pull it through, like so. But I've been knitting continental for so many years that I find that really difficult to do. Instead of which, I hold the yarn in my left hand and I use my thumb or forefinger to flip it over like this. So everything is done with my left hand. My right hand is just moving the needle backwards and forwards. It's a good method, particularly if you're purling stitches, because you can actually do everything with your thumb. So if I do this, when I do a purl stitch, it's very difficult trying to make sure you keep in the center of the screen. With a purl stitch, I'm just flipping it over all the time with my thumb. As I say, my knuckles don't help because they get in the way of anybody seeing what I'm doing.
So have you always knitted
Continental?
Well,
yes, that's the method I was taught by my grandma.
It's not to do with your arthritis or anything.
No, I'd learned that from my grandmother, and for years I assumed that was the way everybody knitted. I mean, there weren't sort of knitter natters then. Everybody just from the family just sat round knitting in the same way because they'd all been taught by Granny. And it was only really when I started going to visit online groups that I thought, oh, hang on a minute. That's not the way I knit. And in fact, my sister is a thrower. Sue knits the other way, the English way. And we still can't figure out why, because I'm sure she would have learned at the same time I did. But she did come to knitting later than I did, I believe. I was knitting things when I was at school, you know, from quite a young age, knitting clothes for my teddy bears mostly. And I must admit, I have adapted things over the years because of the arthritic hands. I don't have an awful lot of grip in them, so I tend to wind them all round. But there are as many variations on knitting as there probably are variations on different cast-ons. There's Portuguese knitting, Tunisian knitting, Norwegian knitting, all of which hold the yarn in different ways. If you've ever watched any of Arnie and Carlos's knitting video casts, they're a lovely Norwegian couple, do very, very fine, the Norwegian version of Fair Isle. I can never remember which one of them's which, but one of them holds his yarn different to the other. And as I say, a lot of it depends. You kind of gets in the brain, and it becomes the way you knit, and it's the way you're more comfortable knitting. Knitting is, I always think, a very personal thing. It's the way you like to do it, the methods you like to use, which is why I've said in the pattern, if you don't like this particular cast on, use one that you are comfortable with. Knitting's not a precise science. It's not like baking. We don't have to weigh and measure everything out and do it absolutely step by step like we would if we were baking a cake or a recipe. It's your hat. It's your knitting. You do it the way you want to do it. If you want to knit the hat and you think, oh, I don't like this big white space at the top, you could put a couple of grey lines in there. If you don't want to have the two colour ribbing, you can do it all in one colour. The only bit you really do need to follow, though, is the chart that does this. But a hat or any other garment should be something personal to you. It should have a little something of you in it, I think. And that it kind of goes along with George Bain's philosophy that, yes, Celtic art, this is Celtic art, this is how it was done originally. But if you learn the basics, you can do it any way you want to do. George Bain tried to encourage his pupils to make their own designs, create their own art. This is a kind of a continuation of that, because once you start learning how things like this are constructed, you can start making your own little tweaks to them. You could knit this knotwork pattern with perhaps a different colour through the middle of it, like on his chart. If you see here, his original chart, he's got one section of it where he's suggested doing it a light green and dark green background with a red pattern on it. It then becomes a work of art, not just a hat. And hopefully you'll be able to follow along the pattern. I'm sure you will. Anybody can do it. Apart from the purl stitches on the border, on the rib, everything else is in knit stitch. You do have to, in sections, get used to holding two yarns to do the two colours, and you will get your yarns twisted up. I'm going to twist this one up and show you what happens when you're doing two colours sometimes. You can sit and carefully study each stitch and make sure that you're not twisting the yarn up. All I do is this. Every couple of rows, I drop the knitting onto my lap, I hold it up into the air, and I do this. I find it quite zen-like. Meditation in knitting, if you like. Just watch it unravel. Knitting should be fun. And don't forget, it's just yarn and needles. If you don't like it, you can undo it and start again. You can throw it across the room, it's not going to break. Mistakes are there to help us learn how to do things. my grandma always used to say. Sometimes if you don't make mistakes, you don't learn how to do things properly. So have fun with it. Have a look at some of the videos that are on YouTube. Think, oh, well, that looks a better way for me to hold the needles to do this. And just have a go. If you're a bit worried about jumping straight into the pattern, get some spare wool and just try a little bit separately first. I hope you're going to have fun doing it, because I had fun designing it. I think probably that's about all the information that I want to try and get into across today. If you'd like to tune into the next Zoom meeting, we'll have some more hints and tips, and hopefully over the weeks we'll have some more interesting little videos for you as well. But Jenny, have we had any questions come in?
Mainly comments,
want to
people
say?
saying that they've enjoyed it. Sorry,
Oh, you've gone off, Jenny. Jenny, you've muted yourself. Jenny, you're muted. Can you hear me, Jenny? We've lost Jenny. Jenny, you're on mute. There we go.
And
I think somebody tried to unmute me at the same time as I unmuted myself. Trying to tell me to shut up, I think.
Well, we've been on for an hour, so...
Yeah, no, we haven't got any questions, just some very nice comments from people.
Good.
Some people saying it looks complicated, but I think you've gone on to say that it isn't, so that's okay. And there's one here guessing that it's double knot.
double knitting.
Double knitting. Oh, sorry.
Double knitting.
Yeah.
For if there are any, I know we've got a few Americans on the group. In America, the wool weight would correspond to a light worsted. It's thicker than a sport. Double knitting in the UK is a thicker wool than the American sport wool, but not as thick as a thick worsted. If you do wraps per inch, I don't know if some of you know wraps per inch, but if you wind your wool loosely around a needle like this, measure out an inch on your needle or something else. Doesn't have to be a needle, could be a matchbox. And then with the wraps close, touching but not squinched up, you measure an inch. This wool comes out, well, this wool's thicker, but the wool for the hat comes out around 11 to 12 wraps per inch. Oh, and somebody did ask me on the Facebook group how to make sure you're not, when you're doing the colour work, you're not getting all tight and squished together. There's a simple way to do that. As you're knitting, a lot of people, when they knit, they tend to knit a lot of stitches and get them all bunched up in their right hand like this, and then spread them out. Make sure every few stitches you're spreading your yarn out on the needles so that you can see a gap in between your stitching, in between the stitches on the needle. If you've got a gap in between the stitches on your needle, it's not going to do this and bunch up, and your floats aren't going to pull in tight. Again, there's a video on the Facebook group about stranded knitting. And as I say, there are lots of others on Facebook if they don't hold the needles the way you want to hold the needles. One last thing, just before I go, we were talking about Lucy Haig and her presentation coming up. I'd like to show you a couple of scarves I've knitted from Lucy Haig's patterns. Lucy does the most intricate patterns. She's designing I would think a slightly less intricate one based on the red and white jumper that Jill showed you earlier. This is one of hers.
Wow.
And in this, the knotwork threads actually go over and under each other. That was one. And these are a bit scruffy because my husband's been wearing them. I actually knitted this one for myself and somebody pinched it. And that's just a sort of an ordinary cable one with a bit of lacework in the middle. Lucy's got some wonderful books out, which are just, you could just sit and drool over, never mind knitting the patterns.
Barbara, don't frighten the novices too much.
No, I'm just, Lucy, I think, has said she'll be kind. Because this is from her book of illuminated knits, which is very complicated. It's the only one I've tried so far.
Right, before you go, Barbara, there are a couple of questions,
Yes.
and I'll come to them. But before I do that, just very quickly, just to reassure you, if you've got any questions, go onto the Knit Along Facebook page and ask Barbara. That's what it's there for. So if I'm, if you've got questions after this, or you get stuck when you start your hat, just get in touch through the Facebook page, because it's there as a chat along and an advisory thing for continual use, even in advance of next week's session and the session afterwards. Yep. There were two questions. I'm presuming on the pattern that's available through the closed Facebook page. Yes. It does say what size of needles we need. It does,
yes.
Yes.
Yes. The pattern is also available on Ravelry. If you just search for Bain's Toorie Bunnet. And as of today, it's now also on Lovecrafts knitting patterns. I'm not sure quite how the search facility works on Lovecrafts, but it's now a new pattern up as of today. It's taken me weeks to get it on there, so it's so complicated. I practically want your grandmother's shoe size. The needles, in case anybody's wondering and wants to start getting things in, you'll need 75 grams, so 2 lots of 35 grams of double knits. I can thoroughly recommend Julie's Black Owl Yarns yarns. If anybody wants to find out more about the kits that we've already prepared, which contain 2 35-gram balls of yarn, a printed pattern in a file wallet, and some very nice postcards from the Groam House shop, you can drop me a note on the Facebook group, or Jenny can give you my email if you don't want to go on the Facebook group. You will need a pair of 4mm circular needles or DPNSs, depending on which you like to work with, and a pair of 3.75mm. The 4mm you'll need for the ribbing and the 2-colour work. The 3.75 you'll need for the 1-colour stitches. This is because 2-colour work knits up a little tighter than if you were doing it just in 1 colour. So you need the extra size up just to allow, otherwise you'd have this band kind of coming in a wee bit on the hat. Yeah, so that's 4mm and 3mm. I used a 60cm long circular needle on mine. So 3.75 and 4mm, and 70 grams of double knit yarn. That's all you need to get started.
Yeah, and then just to reassure Helen, yes, we'll be looking at the actual pattern part of it next week.
Yeah.
So so we're very much taking our time about it, just so that next week I'm imagining we'll have more opportunity for actual verbal questions rather than just chat questions, more interaction. Yeah. But we just wanted to cover a whole range of things this time, so that we could all sort of get to grips with things, make sure we've got a kit, maybe start it. Some people will be quick knitters and might even finish one and would be able to show us something that they've done, maybe along exactly the pattern lines or maybe with a bit of variation. This knit along is designed for all sorts of levels of skill, and what we're hoping is that we'll all have managed to finish a hat by the time we get to about May the 6th, and we can all share. We can just, whatever the date is that day, May the 2nd, May the 4th, and we can all share that information. And yeah, and maybe have our hat picked out of the hat. That would be great.
Yes, well explained, Jill. Yes, for obvious reasons, I don't want to put the pattern on screen or the chart on the screen, because then people won't go out and buy it, basically. and we want the money for the museum. But I will talk you through the pattern line by line from next week, because by then everybody should have got their patterns. I've had orders for patterns and for a kit actually come in today as well, and the people that didn't know about the Facebook group, they might like to come on or order their pattern from one of the other sources. So by next week we should all be ready, looked at the videos on YouTube, followed. I'll put a few more links up during the week. Just get yourself familiarised with the technique, and from next week we can all sit here with our hats and cast on or show what we've done. Yes, Jenny?
Just very quickly, before people start disappearing, just some general things. Can you remember to go and book on art tickets that was mentioned earlier on, so that you get a place for next week. You need to book for all 4 sessions if you want to come to all 4 sessions. Anybody that came not via art tickets or through Barbara or somebody else, can you make sure I've got your emails so that I can keep in contact with you? And the final thing is, if people want to do little practice bits and pieces, we're thinking about doing some yarn bombing in Rosemarkie for the launch of the website and our May Day. So if you didn't feel you wanted to do the hat, which I'm sure you will do because I think the hat's fantastic, you might like to do little bands or little flowers or anything like that that we can then use for yarn bombing Rosemarkie. So that was all I wanted to say. Thanks, Barbara.
That's okay. Thank you very much for getting us all sorted out, Jenny, and organised the programme. And thank you, Jill, for your lovely intro. I'll let you all get off to your knitting needles now, I think. Happy knitting.
I look forward to getting on with the knitting. Yay!
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes. Oops, we've still got Jane. Oh, there we go. I was waiting till the end, Jenny, just to make